The Texas sun burned pale gold across the horizon, spilling over the rows of wire and wooden barracks that made up Camp Huntsville. The air smelled of dust, sweat, and hay, the quiet smell of men who waited for a war to end far away. Inside the compound, the routine never changed. Every morning the siren moaned and the guards walked the fences while hundreds of German prisoners formed their lines. Some were farmers, some students, some soldiers who had seen too much. But that morning, they whispered about the newcomers, civilians, women. The trucks arrived near noon, their tires cutting ruts in the dry ground. The first to step down was a young woman, her blonde hair tucked beneath a ragged kerchief, her eyes not defiant but searching. Her name was Anna Bauer, a nurse captured in France and sent across an ocean to this quiet prison in America. No one had expected to see a woman among them. The guards shifted awkwardly. Even the prisoners forgot their jokes. She carried a small satchel and a folded letter pressed close to her chest. Anna looked around. The barbed wire glittered like a necklace in the sun. The American flag flapped against the wind. She felt the wide Texas sky pressing down on her, as if freedom itself was mocking her from above. That night, the camp buzzed with stories. Who was she? Why had she been brought here? The men whispered that she had nursed Allied wounded, that she spoke English softly, that she was kind. The Americans, too, were unsure how to treat her. In a place built for men hardened by war, she brought a silence no one could name. Days passed. Anna worked quietly in the infirmary, wrapping bandages, tending to blisters and insect bites. She never spoke about the front lines, never mentioned the country she had left behind. When she walked between the barracks carrying her bucket of water, conversations stopped. Some guards looked away, embarrassed by the thought of a woman living behind wire. One afternoon she paused outside the fence watching the ranch horses grazing beyond the outer field. She had always loved horses. Her father had kept them before the war. The smell of hay and sweat reminded her of home, of fields unscarred by bombs. A young American guard named Corporal James Turner noticed her gaze. He was 23, polite, awkward, and still believed decency could survive in war. They belong to the rancher who leases this land, he said through the fence. You ride? Anna turned slightly startled. A little. Before the war. James nodded but said nothing more. Regulations forbade conversation. Still, in the evenings when he patrolled near the infirmary, he would see her looking at the horses again. And sometimes, when the wind was right, he thought he heard her humming. The camp was changing. Letters arrived from families back home, and the prisoners began to realize they might live. But what they spoke of most was not the coming peace. It was the woman who worked with steady hands and eyes that seemed to forgive everyone. By the end of summer, the men had given her a nickname, Engel auf Staub, the angel on dust. And though the guards laughed at the phrase, even they began to treat her differently. No one shouted when she passed. No one cursed. It was as if her quietness had tamed the camp itself. Then came the day when the rancher brought a new horse, a proud chestnut mare that reared and kicked at its halter. From inside the fence, Anna watched, eyes bright with the memory of freedom. James saw her expression, and something inside him hesitated, an impulse he couldn't yet explain. That night, under a pink-orange sunset, he made a decision that would change everything. The evenings in Texas were the only time the air turned soft. The heat slid away from the sand, and the cicadas filled the silence the way artillery once had. It was then that James Turner left the guard post and walked down toward the corral, where the new mare paced in the dusk. He told himself he was checking the gate, nothing more. But he knew what had drawn him there, the same thing that had drawn the prisoner nurse to the fence every evening. Anna stood a few yards away, her pale hair catching what was left of the sun. When she turned and saw him, she froze, half expecting a reprimand. Instead, he said quietly, "You can come closer." She's calmer now. She shook her head, smiling faintly. Rules, Corporal. Always the rules. James leaned on the fence. Rules keep men alive, he said. Then after a pause, softer. Sometimes they keep them from living. The words surprised even him. For a moment, neither spoke. The mare snorted, stamping the earth. Anna finally stepped forward. What is her name? Haven't given her one, James said. She belongs to Mr. Dwyer, the rancher. He just drops them here and says feed her. Don't ride her. He says she's too wild. Anna's eyes narrowed slightly, studying the animal's restless muscles, the tremor in her flanks. No creature is wild forever, she said. Only frightened. It was the first time he heard her voice with something like warmth. The sentence hung in the air long after she had turned away. The next morning, the camp returned to its rhythm. Drills, work details, inspection, lunch, silence. But James caught sight of her through the wire more than once. She was collecting herbs near the infirmary, the skirt of her uniform brushing the dust. And later, when she bent to hand a bandage to a wounded prisoner, he saw her whisper something that made the man laugh, even with his arm in a sling. Whispers spread like wind through the barracks. The woman could speak to Americans kindly, could talk to horses calmly and to wounded men like a sister. Maybe she's here to remind us we're still human, one POW said, half joking. That night, James sat alone at the mess tent, his plate untouched. Outside, a harmonica played an old tune, something about home and open skies. He found himself picturing the woman's hands resting on the reins of that nervous horse, and an idea crept into his mind like a sin. If he let her ride, just once, what harm could it do? No one would know. No report, no record. Just a moment of mercy, unseen and unspoken. But he also knew what disobedience meant. There were men in Leavenworth for less. He thought of his brother who had died in Italy, and of his mother's letter. Don't let the war make you cold. Jimmy promised me that. The promise came back to him now, stubborn as dust. The following afternoon, Anna was outside, hanging sheets to dry behind the infirmary. James approached quietly, his heart thudding like a drum. Miss Bauer, he said. She turned, startled. Yes? He nodded toward the open field. She's calm today. The mare, would you like to see her up close? She frowned. I told you, Corporal, the rules. He swallowed hard. Then call it a walk, not a ride. For a moment she searched his face, trying to read what he meant. Then, without a word, she followed him. The path to the corral was empty, the sun low and gold behind them. The mare lifted her head as they approached. Anna stepped forward, her hand outstretched. The animal snorted, pawed the ground, then leaned her head into the nurse's palm. James exhaled slowly. He had never seen anything like it. Anna smiled for the first time since she had arrived at the camp. You see? She whispered. Not wild. Just frightened. She stroked the horse's neck, whispering in German, words James didn't understand but somehow felt. When she looked back at him, her eyes were bright. May I? She asked. He hesitated only a second, then nodded. Quickly. She gathered the reins, stepped into the stirrup, and in one graceful motion was in the saddle. For a moment the world seemed to stop. The fence, the guards, the barracks, all disappeared behind the shimmer of light. James stepped back, his throat tight. She looked like she belonged there, not as a prisoner, not as a soldier, but as something free. Then she laughed, a small, startled laugh, like the sound of water on stone. It carried across the camp over the heads of men who turned to look. That laugh changed everything. The camp had heard laughter before, but never like this. Not since the war began. Not since the ships brought them across the Atlantic under guard. It wasn't the laughter of mockery or madness. It was something else entirely. The sound of a heart remembering how to live. Men working in the mess tent froze. The guards on the watchtower turned their heads. The German prisoners near the fences dropped their shovels mid-stroke, staring toward the open field where dust and sunlight danced together. And there she was, Anna Bauer, the prisoner. The enemy, the forgotten nurse of another nation, was on horseback. The chestnut mare galloped through the grass, mane flying like ribbons of fire. Her plain gray dress snapped against the wind, her hands steady on the reins. And beside the corral stood Corporal James Turner, motionless as though he himself had forgotten how to breathe. No one shouted. No one moved. For a moment the entire camp, 200 men, 20 guards, and the ghosts of 1,000 battles, simply watched. The mare turned in a wide circle, slowing to a canter. Anna leaned forward, whispering something into the animal's ear. The horse slowed further, trotting toward the sun that was beginning to fall behind the distant trees. To the Germans behind the fence, it was like watching a miracle. The barbed wire melted away in their minds, replaced by open fields and the memory of home. One man whispered, "Mein Gott, sie reitet. My God, she's riding." Another crossed himself. James felt his heart pound in his chest, half terrified, half entranced. Every second she stayed on that horse was a second closer to disaster. If the captain saw, if the rancher complained, if command heard of this, but he couldn't call out. He couldn't break it, because he saw something in her face, something he had never seen in any soldier's eyes. Peace. When the mare finally slowed to a stop, the air around them was so still that even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Anna dismounted carefully, her boots sinking into the dust. She stood beside the horse, her hand resting on its neck. Then the camp came alive again. Applause, hesitant at first, erupted from the barracks. Hands clapped against metal fences. Voices shouted in German and English alike. "Bravo! Ride again. She rides like freedom." Even some of the guards smiled. One of them muttered under his breath, "Well, I'll be damned." Anna looked around, startled, cheeks flushed with color. She wasn't used to attention, not anymore. Her eyes found James's, and she gave a small, shy nod. He managed a smile. "You'd better come down before I get court-martialed," he said quietly. She laughed again, softer this time, and handed him the reins. "Thank you," she said, "for remembering I am human." James didn't know what to say. He wanted to tell her that he hadn't done anything brave, that he only did what felt right. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he looked at the horse, then back at her. "Seems like she's not so wild after all." Anna tilted her head. "Neither are we." That night, the camp was different. The prisoners hummed old songs as they cleaned their dishes. Guards leaned against their posts, quieter, thoughtful. Even the officer on duty, when he heard the story, only sighed and said, "Let it go. If the rancher's horse ain't hurt, we'll pretend we didn't see." But the men who did see would never forget it. They talked about how the woman from across the sea had reminded them all, even for a heartbeat, that mercy could still exist between enemies. That night, one of the older prisoners, a violin maker from Dresden, pulled a broken instrument from his trunk. He spent hours restringing it with bits of wire and thread. Before lights out, a faint tune drifted through the compound, a lullaby his mother had once sung. James lay in his bunk, listening to that melody. He saw again the image of the woman on the horse, the sunlight burning behind her like a halo. For the first time since the war began, he felt proud of something that wasn't written in orders. And outside, under the same sky, Anna Bauer sat on her cot, staring at her hands, the same hands that had once healed the wounded and now had held a living creature again. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to cry, not from sorrow, but from the quiet relief of knowing she was still alive inside. The morning after the ride, Camp Johnson wore a strange silence, the kind of silence that settles before a storm, or after one. The prisoners moved slower than usual, careful, as if one wrong step could break the spell from the day before. Guards whispered when they passed each other near the gates, glancing toward the barn. Even the air seemed to hum with the memory of that laughter, that impossible moment when the line between captive and captor had blurred into something human. But memories in war were fragile things. and rumors traveled faster than forgiveness. Captain Willis arrived before noon. His jeep tore across the dusty road from headquarters, its engine growling like an accusation. The dust cloud it kicked up lingered long after the vehicle stopped, coating everything in a dull gray tension. He stepped out, tall, lean, with a face cut sharp from discipline and distrust. His uniform was spotless, his boots polished enough to reflect the Texas sun. Sergeant Brooks, who had been acting officer on duty, stiffened beside the gate. "Morning, sir." Willis's eyes didn't move from the camp. "Where is she?" "Who, sir?" Brooks asked, though his voice already trembled. "The woman. The German nurse, Bauer." Brooks swallowed. "In the mess, sir. Peeling potatoes." Willis turned to Corporal James Turner, who had just stepped out of the barracks. "You. Walk with me." James felt the heat rise behind his collar. "Yes, sir." They crossed the yard together, boots crunching on gravel. Every prisoner they passed seemed to hold their breath. The sound of a tin cup dropping echoed across the yard like a shot. When they reached the mess, Willis stopped just inside the doorway. Anna was there, sleeves rolled up, head bowed over a wooden table as she worked. Her hair, gold dulled by weeks of dust, fell loose around her face. She didn't notice them at first. "Prisoner Bauer," Willis barked. She froze. Slowly she turned. "Yes, Captain. You rode a horse yesterday." His words weren't a question. They were a sentence. Anna blinked, caught between fear and disbelief. "Only for a moment, sir. The animal was loose. I helped calm it. Don't lie to me." Willis's voice cracked through the room like a whip. Even the guards outside stiffened. James wanted to speak, to step forward, but his throat locked tight. Willis took one step closer to her. "Do you know what this camp is? It's not a playground. It's a military installation holding enemy personnel. You are prisoners of war. You are not permitted to touch government property, let alone ride it around like a Sunday parade." Anna lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry, Captain. I meant no disrespect." "Disrespect?" Willis hissed. "You turned this place into a circus. Half the men here can't stop talking about it. The enemy laughing in my camp? On an American horse?" She didn't answer. Her hands, still red from kitchen work, trembled slightly. Willis turned his fury toward James. "And you. You were the guard on duty." "Yes, sir." "You allowed this to happen?" James's jaw clenched. "She didn't steal the horse, sir. I gave permission." You thought? Willis snapped. "Your job isn't to think, Corporal. It's to follow orders. Do you have any idea what this looks like if the papers find out? If command hears that my men are letting Nazis play cowboy?" The word Nazi struck Anna like a slap. She didn't look up, but the shame in her stillness was deafening. Willis exhaled sharply, pacing the room. "You'll both face disciplinary review. Bauer, solitary for a week. No work detail. Turner confined to quarters until further notice." James's fists balled at his sides. He wanted to protest, to explain that for one fleeting moment the world had felt right. But he knew it wouldn't matter. War didn't care about right. It cared about rules. Hours later, the sun dipped low again, staining the camp in bruised orange light. Anna sat alone in the holding hut, a small wooden cell used more for storage than punishment. Dust floated in the air like ash. A tin cup of water sat untouched beside her. She could still feel the wind in her hair, the rhythm of hooves beneath her, the way the men had clapped and smiled as if the war had stopped for them. Now that moment felt like a dream stolen by daylight. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "Vielleicht war es das wert." Perhaps it was worth it. Meanwhile, James sat on his bunk, staring at his empty hands. Every sound from outside, the clang of the gate, the distant murmur of the prisoners, felt heavier now. Sergeant Brooks appeared in the doorway. "Rough day, Turner." James didn't look up. Captain made his point. Brooks leaned against the frame, arms crossed. "You're not the first to get burned for doing something decent. Won't be the last." James finally turned his head. "Was it decent?" letting her ride. Maybe the captain's right. Maybe it was stupid. Brooks chuckled softly. Son, the whole damn war's stupid. But what you did, that was human. He tossed a folded paper onto James's bed. Letter from HQ came through this morning. War in Europe's over. Germany's surrendering. James blinked. Over, pretty much. Command says the camps will start closing soon. Some of these folks might even be going home. The sergeant started to leave, then paused. Might be that what you did yesterday won't matter much in a week. Or maybe it'll be the only thing anyone remembers. When he was gone, James unfolded the letter, staring at the words through the haze of dusk. War's over. The words felt impossible, and yet they made everything make sense. The ride, the silence, the applause. It wasn't rebellion. It was release. The war had ended in spirit before the news even reached them. That night, a soft rain began to fall, a rare mercy for Texas that year. In her hut, Anna pressed her hand to the window pane, feeling the cool water streak across her fingers. For the first time in years, she let herself imagine a life beyond fences and uniforms, a life with sunlight and open fields and no one to call her enemy. And in the barracks, James sat awake long after lights out, listening to the rain tapping the tin roof. He thought of the horse, the dust, the laughter, and he knew, whatever came next, he'd carry that sound with him. The day the camp fell silent. Because one woman remembered how to live. The war had ended, not with fanfare, not with music or victory parades, but with the slow, quiet unraveling of days. By June, the Texas heat had thickened again. The fields around Camp Johnson shimmered beneath a white sky, and the once crisp flags now hung limp against the poles. Everything felt tired. The guards, the prisoners, even the air itself. A notice arrived one morning. All German prisoners were to be processed for repatriation within 2 weeks. The guards gathered around the bulletin board as if reading an obituary. Some smiled. War's over, they said, time to go home. Others just stared. Home was a place few could picture anymore. James Turner stood among them, his uniform rumpled, his face drawn from sleepless nights. He read the notice once, then again, his eyes tracing every letter as if it might change the ending. Bauer, Anna. Her name was on the list. Anna was back on work duty by then. She peeled potatoes again, mended uniforms, tended the garden. The punishment had ended, but the memory of it still lingered in her walk. A quiet humility. Or perhaps just fatigue. When James found her near the barracks that evening, she was kneeling by a patch of wilted roses, trimming away the dry petals. They'll bloom again, she said softly, without looking up. He crouched beside her. The letter came. You're going home. She didn't move for a long moment. Then she set down the shears. Home, she repeated as if the word itself was foreign. Do you know where they'll send you? They say to Bremen, she whispered. If there is still a Bremen. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of rain and diesel from the highway beyond the camp. James looked at her hands, hands that had once held reins, trembling with laughter. You ever think you'll miss this place? Anna smiled faintly. The fences? The guards? He shrugged. The quiet. The sunsets, the moments in between, her gaze softened. Yes, I'll miss those. The last week moved like a slow farewell. Trucks came and went, carrying boxes of records, supplies, and men. The camp emptied in pieces, each departure leaving the silence a little heavier. One afternoon, James was assigned to the loading yard, where the departing prisoners queued with their few belongings. Some carried photographs, others books or wooden carvings they had made during captivity. Anna stood among them, her dress neatly pressed, a small satchel in her hands, the Texas sun caught in her hair, turning it gold again. James hesitated, then walked up to her. They treating you all right? He asked. She nodded. Yes. They say we'll board the ship in Galveston tomorrow. He wanted to say something more, something that might stay with her beyond the fences. But all that came out was, you look Ready, she smiled. Are you? He frowned. For what? For peace. The words landed somewhere deep, heavier than he expected. When the time came, the prisoners climbed onto the trucks, engines rumbling beneath them like distant thunder. Anna turned at the last moment, looking back at the camp. The barracks, the mess hall, the stables, each one holding a fragment of the life she had lived between wars. Her eyes found James by the gate. He raised a hand, unsure what else to do, then without a word, she stepped off the truck bed. The guard nearest her started forward, but she lifted a hand. Just a moment, she said quietly. She crossed the yard one last time, her boots crunching softly in the dust. The air hung thick with heat and memory. When she reached James, she stopped just close enough for him to see the shimmer in her eyes. You never told me, she said, why you let me ride that day. He swallowed. Because for once I wanted to see someone free. She held his gaze for a heartbeat that felt like forever. Then she reached into her satchel and pulled out something wrapped in cloth, a small wooden carving of a horse. She pressed it into his hand. Then remember it, she whispered. Before he could reply, she turned and walked back to the truck. The engine coughed to life. Dust rose in a golden cloud as the convoy rolled away, carrying with it the last echoes of laughter that had ever filled Camp Johnson. Days later, the camp stood empty. The gates unguarded, the barracks hollow. James stayed behind to oversee the final closure. Each step through the abandoned compound felt like walking through a ghost. He ended up at the stables, the same stall where the horse had once stood. The air was still, thick with memory and hay. In the corner, on a rusted nail, hung a single horseshoe. He picked it up, turned it in his hands, and smiled faintly. Outside, the Texas sky stretched wide and endless. He placed the carving of the horse on the fence post, its silhouette catching the last light of day. For a moment, he imagined her again, hair flying in the wind, laughter breaking the silence, the camp alive. Then he whispered to the empty yard, "Ride on, Anna."